Hello and welcome to Radiant Realization with Namrata. On this show, we deep dive into captivating conversations about life. I am your host Namrata Shah and I am here to welcome Palak for today's conversation. Palak is a grief recovery specialist and she is going to help us process a difficult emotion easily. Welcome, Palak. I am excited to have you today on my show.
Thank you, Namrata. Thank you so much for having me for this opportunity. And I'm also feeling super excited to record this episode with you.
Palak, I would like to know from you of what got you started to pick grief recovery as your coaching niche and why you feel that is the need for people to understand how to process their grief.
Yes, for sure. So as I was getting trained as a professional counselor, I realized that grief and loss is something which we all experience in our lives, right? Sometimes we don't realize that the loss we have experienced would affect our life in a significant way. But this is kind of an experience. Experiencing a loss in our life is very unavoidable. And that's the reason why I wanted to get specialized into grief and recovery. Grief and loss recovery because I thought that through this I would be able to help people learn about healthy grieving, help people learn about how to cope up with significant losses, and instead of getting into self destructive behaviors, how to cope up with loss in an effective way. So that was my reason of getting trained as a grief recovery specialist.
In simple words, if you can explain what grief means and what is the natural response to handling grief.
Yes. So grief, in simple words, it is an emotional reaction to a significant loss. Now, the loss could be loss of a relationship. It could be death of a loved one. Like those are the most common ones. But it could also be loss of trust, loss of safety. And when an individual reacts emotionally to that loss, that is grieving. The signs of grieving can be seen, like I personally use holistic approach when it comes to coping up with loss, right? And signs of grieving can be seen physiologically and also psychologically. So for example, when a person is grieving, there could be disturbance in the sleep cycles, or sleep cycle or appetite, or there could be some physical signs like getting feeling exhausted most of the times, extreme stress, feeling extreme stress after a person has experienced a significant loss. For psychological signs, it could be extreme stress, anxiety, also feeling overwhelmed, overwhelming thoughts, not being able to um, cope up with uncertainty for the future, because when we lose, when we experience a significant loss, there's a lot of uncertainty around the situation, what's going to happen in the future, right? So when an ex person indicates that it's been difficult for that person to cope up with uncertainty, the person might be grieving, right, or may need a little bit of extra help in coping up with the loss. So yeah.
And in your personal experience, how has grief shaped your understanding about handling loss?
Yes. So for me as well, since I started to learn more about healthy grieving, I started to recognize patterns in my life. And I started to reflect back on the significant losses I have experienced in my life and how I choose to cope up. So, for example, when I immigrated to Canada from India, at that time, I didn't have time to grieve. I didn't have time to even acknowledge that I left a life behind in India. That's something I realized later on in my life, that maybe I should have um, gave myself more time to acknowledge the loss, the change, also embracing the change in my life, and also handled grief in a better way, right? So for me, as I have, like, since I have gotten trained into this stream, I have started to realize recognize those patterns and also reflect back on my life, and also finding ways to how cope up in a better way in the future. That experiencing a significant loss, it's unavoidable and it's always going to come up in the future as well. Either it's a loss of a relationship or trust or safety. We are going to continue experiences those losses in our lives.
And if you can walk us through the stages of grief that an individual would go through.
Yes. So the most common stages of grief, there are 5 stages. And in the beginning, I would like to mention that those are not linear. They don't come one after another. A person is usually seen juggling around these stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are the 5 most common stages of grief. And as I said, healing comes in waves, right? It's not that a person would always grow from denial to anger and then bargaining and then depression and then acceptance. Sometimes the acceptance comes before denial. That happens. You have accepted the loss and then you go into denial mode. So that is very commonly seen in people grieving. And that's why we say that grieving is non-linear and healing comes in waves. It's not a straight line.
Across these 5 stages, how do people experience these stages? If you can give some example.
Yes. So when a person is in denial stage, the person is in complete denial that the loss has happened. So, for example, if a person has lost, you know, experienced a death of a loved one, it's difficult for that person to even accept that that happened. It's denial of reality, and then is feeling angry about the situation. For bargaining, it's more of like getting into some what if scenarios, illusionary states. Oh, how my life would have been if that loss didn't occur. That's more of bargaining. And then is depression, which involves depressive mood, extreme sadness, and then comes the acceptance. But as I said, that mostly people are seen juggling between these stages.
And when it comes to different type of losses, like a loss of loved one through death, or end of relationship, or loss of job, are this grief processed differently by different people, or usually it is same the way the human body would react to this griefs?
And not at all. I think grief is a very personal experience. Everybody got a different level of emotional sensitivity around situations. Also, everybody got different level of self-awareness. So, for example, loss of a job, it may affect me more intensely than it would affect another person. Loss of a relationship, maybe that would affect me very deeply, but the other person wouldn't get as affected. So I think when it comes to intensity, it's different. Grieving is very personal experience, and also there is no right or wrong way of grieving as well.
And how does this grief manifest in day-to-day activities?
Yes, well, as I said, that when I gave you like my personal example, that when I immigrated to a new country, at that time, I didn't even realize that I was grieving. Now, when I reflect back on that time, I can clearly notice that at that time I was grieving, right? And maybe I wasn't paying too much attention to what my body needed at that time. I was experiencing extreme stress. There was a lot of overwhelming thoughts around uncertainty, how I'm going to settle my life in a new country, right? So those all were signs of grieving, but I didn't realize back then. I was super busy, kind of like setting a new life here in Canada. And as you said, that how it manifests in our life, in our day-to-day lives, we need to pay more attention to um, physiological changes, right? After significant loss, is it affecting our sleep? Is it affecting our eating pattern? Is it affecting, are we able to conduct our day to day activities, also our physiological and emotional well-being, is it affecting that? Are we feeling signs of stress? Are we feeling signs of depressed mood? Are we withdrawing from the activities we used to enjoy? So it's a very holistic approach when it comes to recognizing how it's manifesting in our day-to-day lives.
And while going through grief, the individual would be experiencing some intense emotion like anger, guilt, or prolonged sadness. So, how can he or she process this emotion?
Yes. So when it comes to processing, it is important to acknowledge what you feel what you feel. Hiding or shying away from talking about the situation or how the loss has affected a person is not as helpful. It's very important to acknowledge the emotion around that, and also explore the options. How are you going to process that emotion in an effective way? So when I took my training as a grief recovery specialist, it was a very transformative journey for myself as well, because I was taught that when it comes to recovering from grief, right, it's not about completely forgetting about the loss. It's more of how are we going to carry that loss in our life, so that it's not affecting us in a negative way. So the loss is always going to be there, right? If a person has lost a relationship, a significant relationship, or have experienced that of a loved one, that loss is going to be there. Grief recovery is not about forgetting about the situation. It's not about completely kind of like shutting that door. It's more of like how are we going to carry that loss gracefully in our life? How are we still going to navigate through life with that loss, right? And not get into any kind of self destructive behaviors or patterns. So that's what healthy grieving involves. It's more of taking at least 1% responsibility of how we feel about that loss, and how are we going to choose to navigate through our life carrying that loss with us.
And some of the healthy ways of expressing grief and loss would be.
Yes. So first of all, writing has helped me and some of the people I have supported through my grief and loss journey. Writing your thoughts down. When we put our thoughts down on a piece of paper, it gives our thoughts a sense of acknowledgement. It's validating what we are feeling, right? It's more of like telling ourselves that whatever we feeling about that significant loss, it's all valid. It's normal to feel that way, right? And when we put it down on a piece of paper, it's more of getting connected to ourselves, but it's also expressing what we feel, right? So finding healthy and safe ways to express what we feel is plays a significant role in when it comes to grief and loss recovery. For some people, creativity helps, right? Making art, music, all those different forms of being creative, right? It also helps in expressing emotions, getting connected with the right resources. It's important to have that support system. As I mentioned earlier, that not talking about how you feel or shying away from talking about emotions is not usually helpful. More you express and find the right ways to express what you feel about that loss, plays significant role in grief and loss recovery.
What would be the unhealthy ways that people usually pick up on an automatic basis while going through difficult phase of their life?
Yes, I have noticed people sometimes getting into some self-destructive behaviors like excessive consuming excessive alcohol, drugs. That happens. Also, negative self-talk as well, or internal dialogue that maybe we will never be able to build a good lifestyle after that significant loss. So that negative self-talk happens to a lot of people. Those are the most common behaviors I have noticed in people who are grieving, which can affect your life in a very negative way. So that's why it's important to build that safe environment for yourself. Recognize who are the people who would be able to listen to you in a very non-judgmental way and connecting with them.
You bring in the importance of support system, maybe friends,
Yes,
family, community, or a professional. And how do
yes.
they help?
When we express our emotions, it gives us an opportunity to process them in a healthy way, right? Kind of like bottling up everything and keeping it to ourselves is usually not as helpful. And I have read many books when it comes to regulating nervous systems. Self-regulation and co-regulation. Co-regulation is more of like when we get some help to regulate our nervous system, always work better than self-regulation. Just being independent with kind of like processing your emotions, it's always better to get a little bit of help if you can. Connect with the right resource. It's very important to connect with the right resource in the process. As you mentioned, a professional who is trained in this field, or friends or family who can listen to you non judgmentally. It's very important to recognize those people in your life.
Hmm. How does grief affects physical and mental health of an individual?
Grieving is a normal emotional reaction to a significant loss. It can for sure cause extreme sadness, hurt, disappointment, sometimes shame as well. And again, I would like to say that it's a very unavoidable experience. So it for sure kind of like manifests in our lives. And sometimes we recognize it, sometimes we don't even recognize it until it starts to really affect us significantly. Significantly. Physically, most common signs are it's going to affect sleep pattern, a person's sleep pattern, appetite as well. It's more of like if a person is not able to do the day-to-day stuff, not being able to conduct daily routine. Psychologically, overwhelming thoughts, a lot of stress around what's going to happen in the future after that significant loss.
Hmm. Okay. And for an individual who is going through grief, how can he or she find a new sense of normalcy? Because they'll have to process this, they'll have to again back to normal. So how can they find the new sense of normalcy while going through this grieving process?
Yes. So grief and loss training, right, teaches us taking at least 1% of responsibility of how a person feels about that loss. It's not about removing that loss from the life. So the loss is going to become the new normal, because the intention there is not to like completely forget about the loss a person has experienced. It's more of how gracefully we can carry that loss in our life, so that our life we are not getting into any kind of like negative patterns. um so stimuli that loss is, of course, like it happened, right, and it caused some kind of emotional reaction. But how we chooses to feel about that loss in the future, that is in our control. The action is in our control. And that's what grief and loss recovery is all about. How are we going to create that new normal for us, with considering that loss in our life? And for that, it's very important to acknowledge what happened. It's very important to express, how you feel about that loss. It's very important to explore the safe options to express the emotion around that loss.
Palak, if it's a loss of loved one or end of a relationship or a loss of job, so as an adult, we might know the situation, by looking at the situation, comprehending the situation. But as a child, they might not understand. So in
Mm.
that case, what is the responsibility of an adult in communicating this information to child, helping child process this information, and still having a healthy version of child in place?
Yes. Um, and childhood experiences are the ones which shape our personality, right? And if a child knows how to grieve in a healthy way, that's going to significantly affect that child's life in a positive way, right? So the responsibility, I think it's a collective responsibility. Of course, parents, like the primary caregiver, I would say, is responsible to educate the child about the signs of grief, like how a loss can affect that child's life, how the child can choose to talk about creating that safe environment for that child to feel comfortable, to seek help and also express emotions, right? I think plays an important role. And also when it comes to children, I feel that it's very important to create that safe environment in homes and also in the outer world for children to feel safe to talk about their feelings, right? And grieving, healthy grieving involves a lot of expressing emotions, acknowledging what you feel about the loss. It's a collective responsibility. Of course, primary caregivers or parents, they play an important role, but also out in the world, right? Teachers, classmates, anybody a child interacts with in day to day life, right? We all are responsible to create that safe environment for a child to express the emotions and so that they can feel comfortable about learning how to grieve in a healthy way.
What would be like a effective way of explaining death to a child or a change in financial status to a child?
Yeah, that's a good one because change in financial status, right? That's very common for a child to experience. And in the childhood, it's difficult to kind of like comprehend, to know like what's happening. Maybe having that open conversation with the child. Okay, so this has happened. How do you feel about that? In a very non-judgmental way, listening to the child. Also, if the child needs some space to kind of like process the emotions, giving that person, the child, space to really make sense of what happened, and then when feel comfortable coming back to you and talking about that. It's more of creating, as I said, like creating that safe environment for the child. Also, being very honest. Emotional honesty plays an important role when it comes to communicating about grief. Also, as a primary caregiver, feeling honest about how it has impacted. So, for example, change in the financial status, how it has impacted you as a person. Sharing that with the child, it has impacted me in this way. What do you think how it has impacted you? What changes it has made you in that life in simple languages so that child can understand that.
Also, what can an individual do to take this grief as a catalyst for their personal growth or their personal transformation? So they come out by looking at the brighter side of whatever has taken place in their life.
Yes, it can be a great catalyst. As I said, that when I was getting trained as a grief and loss specialist, it transformed my life in many, many ways. I was able to recognize those patterns in my life, which was holding me back, right? And why I was having such difficulty letting go of my past. It happens. It can be because like once we learn about healthy grieving, we cannot like let the loss hold us into the past. We know that we got tools, we got the mindset to recover from the situation and also carry that grief with such grace in our lives. So it can be a very great catalyst when it comes to transformation. because recognizing what I feel that in our life, once we start to recognize patterns, how we respond to losses in our life, we can always have the option. We create that opportunity for us to choose better ways to deal with the loss in the future. So it can be very transformative.
Somebody do to build resilience in the time of loss.
Mm-hmm.
What
Sorry,
advice
would
would you
you?
give? What
Mhm.
advice would you give to somebody who will have to build resilience to pass through this loss phase?
I would remind that person that they do have the strength within to recover from that loss and also carry that loss in their life gracefully. The strength, they got it within. It's just recognizing how to take at least 1% of the responsibility, how you feel about that loss. So I can, of course, help that person to recognize ways, explore ways to express emotions and also process them so that they can at least be responsible for like how they feel about the loss. I would just remind that person that you do have the strength within to recover. It's just that you have to step into your power in the moment.
Especially in case of loss of loved one, we hold on to a lot of memories from past, which
Mhm.
usually surfaces in your day-to-day life after you've missed them. So in this, what would you recommend on how can an individual honor this memory while going through grief process and come out as a better individual?
Yes, it's very important to honor those memories, to be honest. Our purpose here as grief recovery specialists is not to erase or fade away those memories, right? Or to recover from that loss completely. It's about carrying the loss with us. Those memories are a great way of like connecting with ourselves when we have lost a loved one. It's always important. Like we can always reflect back on those memories. It's just that changing the way how we feel about that loss and how can we control our response to how we are going to react in the future when the trigger happens again, because reflecting back on memories can be triggering. A lot of like emotional reaction can happen, but of course we can take the responsibility of how we choose to feel about those memories. The purpose there is not to erase anything, it's just how we choose to carry that loss with us in our lives.
One thing which I would like to know from you, let you know is while an individual is going through this difficult phase of life, how can they find hope for a brighter future? Because their thoughts might not be that positive. There might be lot of past incidents and events which would be stuck, and they would be recycling those thoughts in their mind. For them to move ahead, how can they see hope out of this?
Yes, and that's a really good question. That's something which holds us back, not finding that hope, not being able to step into our strength. Um, And the best way is validating what you're feeling is normal. And also reminding ourselves that we do have strength within to recover from the situation, to carry that loss in our life in a positive way. It's also like being a little bit mindful of what we feed to our mind. Of course, validating our emotions and feelings are important. Just reminding ourselves that whatever we feel around that loss has impacted our life, and that's the reason why we are sad. It's normal to feel sad in that situation, but how we are going to carry that loss in the future? How are we going to shape our future? Through those emotional reactions is important. So I think validating feelings, acknowledging your emotions, and also really trying to take control of how you respond to your feelings around that loss.
True,
That
Palak.
helps. When we know that we have that control, we start to see the hope for the future, isn't that? I think we only feel hopeless because we feel that, oh, we cannot do nothing about the situation. It can never change. But when we remind ourselves that we do have a little bit of control, and we can choose how we respond to that loss, we can choose, we do have the option to choose how we feel about that loss, we start to see a little bit of hope. Yeah.
Okay. Palak, nice talking to you. You've shared responses in such an insightful manner. And the topic of grief, which is high emotional topic and just very difficult topic, but you've made it so easy and so comfortable to understand, and you made it so normal. Like it is part of our day-to-day life. Maybe we are not aware to that extent to process it, and so it stays stuck in our life and it hindrances our future growth. But the 5 stages that you said and how we navigate those 5 stages is the ultimate deciding factor to look at the brighter side of the life.
Yes. And I would like to mention something here. There's a very common myth about grief and loss. Time heals everything. A lot of people believe that time heals everything. What I was taught in my training as a grief recovery specialist, time time does not heal everything. Intentional actions needs to be taken to heal ourselves from the situation. If time heals everything, we wouldn't be feel sad about situations which occurred 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So intentional actions need to be taken to heal from situations and step into a journey of healthy grieving. As you mentioned that, a lot of people are not as aware that, it's even possible to grieve in a healthy way. Maybe that's why a lot of people hold back themselves and kind of like still holding living in the past. When we create that safe environment for people to talk about their losses, they feel comfortable to explore the option of recovery from that loss. So, as I said, it's a collective responsibility, as me as a professional, and also everybody can take part in it, creating that safe environment for people around us so that they can feel comfortable to talk about the losses and also consider recovering and shape their life in a better way.
Thank you for coming, Palak, and thank you for sharing all your experiences and knowledge that would really help. Like the knowledge that you shared, it would really help people who are viewing this video. Thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you so much, Namrata, for having me on your show.